The late afternoon sun, a molten orb beginning its slow descent, cast dramatically elongated shadows across the meticulously manicured emerald green lawns of Harmony Creek. This subdivision, a carefully curated diorama of suburban perfection, prided itself on its rigidly enforced serenity, a quietude that sometimes felt more like a hushed vigilance. 12-year-old Zoey, her bright Kelly green Girl Scout, sash of vibrant, rebellious splash of color against the muted, HOA-approved tones of beige and taupe suburbia, pulled her cookie-laden wagon down the sidewalk with determined if slightly tired steps. She hummed a little self-composed tune, a gentle vibration. She felt more than truly heard, her advanced cochlear implants, marvels of modern technology, carefully and almost invisibly tucked beneath her light brown, shoulder-length hair. Each house, with its identical HOA-mandated mailbox and obsessively edged walkway, was a potential adventure, a fresh stage for her well-rehearsed sales pitch, a genuine, hopeful smile offered in exchange for an order of Thin Mints Samoas, or perhaps the ever-popular tagalongs. Zoey genuinely loved this annual ritual. It wasn't just about the cookies. It was about the fleeting glimpses of independence it offered, the friendly faces she encountered, most of them anyway, and the satisfying clink of coins and rustle of bills that meant she was one step closer to her goal. She was diligently saving her earnings for a new professional-grade art tablet, one with a pressure-sensitive stylus and a vast color gamut that would allow her to bring the fantastic, shimmering creatures that danced in her vivid imagination to life on a digital canvas. She approached the next house on her meticulously organized list, a stately two-story colonial, painted an approved shade of colonial blue. Its garden, an unnervingly perfect tapestry of controlled flora. Each rosebush, identical to its neighbor, was pruned to within an inch of its life, their thorny stems reaching skyward like supplicating disciplined arms. This was the residence of Miss Deirdre Ainsworth, a prominent and often feared member of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association Board. Zoey had seen her at the sparsely attended mandatory neighborhood meetings, always impeccably dressed in power suits, her voice sharp, carrying and laced with an undeniable edge of impatience. Her pronouncements on lawn height regulations, acceptable mailbox color palettes, and the precise allowable wattage for exterior lighting were delivered with an air of absolute, unshakable authority. Zoey took a small, steadying breath, her hand briefly touching the smooth fabric of her sash. She knew Ms. Ainsworth, or Dee Dee Dreadful, as some of the more rebellious neighborhood kids whispered behind cupped hands, had a formidable, even chilling reputation. This encounter would require all her practiced poise. Zoey walked up the pristine flagstone path, each stone perfectly level and weed-free. The small, sturdy wheels of her red wagon made a soft, rhythmic rumbling sound on the textured concrete that she barely registered through the soles of her sneakers, a tactile sensation rather than an auditory one. She reached the imposing front door, a deep, glossy black, and rang the doorbell. It was a new model, sleek and metallic, with a prominent, slightly convex lens glinting beneath it, part of the recently implemented Harmony Secure and Serene initiative, spearheaded by HOA President Alistair Finch, an initiative that had significantly increased monthly dues for all residents. Zoey gave the button a polite, quick press. She waited, her practiced, hopeful smile already in place, her order form held ready. The door didn't open with a welcoming creak or even a polite click. It was wrenched open with a sudden, sharp, aggressive movement that made Zoey flinch, an involuntary backward shuffle of her feet. Deirdre Ainsworth stood framed in the doorway, a tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the dim interior of her house. She was clad in a crisp, oyster-gray linen pantsuit, her platinum blonde hair coiffed into a rigid, unyielding helmet of lacquered perfection. In her right hand, she held a steaming, oversized ceramic mug of dark coffee, the black liquid almost seeming to vibrate with a life of its own, its bitter aroma cutting through the sweet scent of the nearby roses. What is it? Deirdre's voice was clipped impatient, each word a sharp shard of annoyance. She didn't give Zoey a moment to begin her rehearsed greeting. Her eyes, cold and a startling shade of pale blue, flicked dismissively over Zoey's sash, then down to the colorful boxes visible in the wagon. No soliciting, it's clearly posted. Multiple signs at every entrance to this community. Are you incapable of reading plain English, child? Her gaze lingered for a moment on Zoey's ear, where a hint of the implant was barely visible. Zoey's carefully constructed smile faltered, threatening to crumble. She quickly began to sign her hands, moving with practiced articulate grace. Hello, I'm Zoey, and I'm selling Girl Scout cookies. Simultaneously, she spoke the words, her voice a little soft, perhaps a touch hesitant, but clear enough. She knew from experience that some people were uncomfortable or unfamiliar with sign language, and she always tried to make communication as easy and accessible as possible. She often wondered if people like Miss Ainsworth ever considered how much extra effort that took Deirdre Ainsworth's face tightened visibly, her lips thinning into a razor-sharp, disapproving line. The contempt in her eyes was palpable. I don't have time for this pantomime, or this nonsense, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, school fundraisers. It's all the same. Constant, unwelcome interruptions. This is a private, exclusive community, not a public marketplace. Faye. She took a deliberate, menacing step forward, her physical presence looming over Zoey, casting the smaller girl in her shadow. I believe I made myself clear. No soliciting. The last two words were delivered with a chilling emphasis. Zoey, though intimidated, tried once more, her training and polite persistence kicking in. She held up her order form, pointing to the colorful pictures of cookies. Would you like to support my troop? Before Zoey could finish her sentence, before her brain could even fully process the rapidly escalating hostility in Miss Ainsworth's demeanor, Deirdre Ainsworth moved with shocking, terrifying speed, with a sharp, venomous hiss of, "Get off my property, you little pest." She flicked her wrist with brutal precision. The entire contents of the steaming coffee mug, a scalding dark brown torrent, flew through the air in a sickening arc, directly unerringly into Zoey's unsuspecting face. The world exploded, not with sound for Zoey, but with an instantaneous, unbearable wave of searing, blinding pain. The heat was a physical blow, unimaginable, consuming. She cried out a choked, voiceless gasp, escaping her lips, as her hands flew instinctively to her burning cheeks, her eyes, her forehead. She couldn't hear the splash of liquid against her skin, couldn't hear Deirdre's sharp, perhaps surprised intake of breath that might have signaled a micro-moment of horrified realization, or more likely merely annoyance, at the resulting mess on her pristine porch. All Zoey knew was the agony, the sudden, terrifying darkness, as her vision blurred and then vanished behind a curtain of pain, the acrid, cloying smell of coffee overwhelming her senses. She stumbled backward, disoriented, and blinded her foot, catching on the wagon's handle. The little red wagon overturned, sending boxes of Thin Mints Samoas and Do-si-dos scattering like fallen soldiers across the immaculate HOA-approved lawn. She fell, landing hard on the unforgiving concrete path, the searing pain in her face now cruelly joined by the sharp, stinging protest of her scraped knees and elbows. Hot, immediate tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the sticky, burning coffee that coated her skin, creating a grotesque, painful mask. Deirdre Ainsworth stood on her porch, the empty ceramic mug still clutched in her hand, her expression frozen for a heartbeat, in a mask of something that might have been surprise or perhaps a flicker of shock at her own actions, but it quickly, almost instantaneously, morphed into rigid, self-righteous indignation. Well now, look what you made me do. She snapped her voice, dripping with blame, as if Zoey's mere presence, her polite attempt to sell cookies, was solely responsible for Deirdre's own violent, unconscionable outburst. You shouldn't have been here in the first place. This is precisely what happens when people refuse to follow simple rules. She made no move to help. Zoey offered no gesture of concern or remorse. Instead, she turned her back ramrod straight, an embodiment of callous indifference, and retreated into the cool dimness of her house. The heavy front door clicked shut with an air of chilling finality, leaving Zoey a sobbing, injured, bewildered heap on her pristine, pitiless walkway. Zoey lay there for a long moment, utterly disoriented, the pain a roaring, uncontrolled inferno in her head, consuming her thoughts, her senses. She could feel the hot, sticky liquid dripping down her neck, seeping into her hair onto her scalp. Her cochlear implants felt strange against her skin, unnaturally hot, almost burning. With trembling, hesitant fingers, she carefully reached up and pulled them away from her ears, a small whimpering sound of pure misery escaping her lips. The profound, absolute silence that immediately enveloped her was a familiar state, but it was the unrelenting, escalating pain that truly consumed her every conscious thought. She curled into a tight fetal ball on the hard concrete, trying to make herself smaller, as if that could somehow lessen the agony, somehow make her invisible to the source of this horror. A few houses down on a neighboring street, Sarah Jensen, Zoey's mother, was tending to her own small, vibrant flower garden, a welcome grounding respite from the often grim, emotionally draining realities of her demanding profession. Sarah was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation assigned to the Elite Crimes Against Children unit. Her days were frequently filled with the darkest, most depraved aspects of humanity, with stories and images that haunted her waking hours. But here at home, in the supposed sanctuary of Harmony Creek, with her supportive husband Mark and her beloved daughter Zoey, she found her peace, her emotional anchor. She glanced at her wristwatch, a practical, unflashy model. Zoey had been gone for a while now. Long enough, Sarah mused, to make a few successful sales, perhaps even charm a few reluctant neighbors. A soft smile touched Sarah's lips as she thought of Zoey's earnest determination, her quiet courage. Then a faint sound, almost imperceptible, a distressed high-pitched cry carried on the gentle afternoon breeze. Sarah straightened up from her weeding, her head tilting, her senses instantly on alert. It was probably just neighborhood kids playing their games, often loud and dramatic. But then she heard it again, more distinct this time, sharper, clearer. A sound of pure, unadulterated misery that clutched at her heart with icy, vice-like fingers. It sounded like Zoey. It was Zoey. Every maternal instinct honed by years of professional training to detect subtle cues of distress flared to life, overriding the calm, gardening suburbanite persona. She dropped her trowel with a clatter onto the grass, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest like a trapped bird. A sudden, inexplicable and terrifying dread washing over her in a cold wave. She ran, her breath catching in her throat, her feet flying over the perfectly paved sidewalks. She rounded the corner onto Primrose Lane, Deirdre Ainsworth Street, her eyes scanning frantically, and then she saw her Zoey. Her Zoey, crumpled on the walkway in front of the Ainsworth house, cookies strewn around her like fallen, brightly colored confetti. The little red wagon overturned beside her. Sarah's blood ran cold, a chilling premonition gripping her. She sprinted her own fear, a suffocating heavy blanket, the meticulously landscaped gardens blurring in her peripheral vision. Zoey, Zoey, baby, what happened? What's wrong? As she got closer, the strong, sickeningly sweet and burnt smell of coffee hit her an incongruous scent in the otherwise pristine air. Zoey looked up, her small face, a horrifying mess of angry red, already blistering skin. Tears, tracking muddy paths through the brown, sticky liquid that coated her cheeks, her forehead, her delicate eyelids. Her eyes were swollen, almost shut. Her lips trembling uncontrollably. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. A gasp of pure horror escaped her. This wasn't a simple childhood accident. This was something else, something deliberate, something monstrous. Mommy. Zoey sobbed, her voice hoarse, raspy, barely recognizable. She reached out a trembling, coffee-stained hand. It hurts, Mommy. It hurts so much. Jert. Sarah knelt beside her daughter on the hard concrete, her professional training battling fiercely with the overwhelming volcanic surge of maternal fury and abject terror. Okay, baby, okay, Mommy's here. Let me see your face. Gently, with infinite care, she examined Zoey's injuries. The skin was an alarming, angry red, already starting to welt and blister in several places. Her eyelids were puffy and swollen, her eyelashes matted with the sticky residue. This was a burn, a significant thermal burn caused by hot liquid. Who did this to you, Zoey? Honey, you have to tell me. Tell Mommy exactly what happened. Through hiccuping sobs, broken phrases, and desperate shaky signs, Zoey recounted the horrifying, bewildering encounter, the no-soliciting sign she hadn't even seen Miss Ainsworth's angry, sharp voice, the sudden, incomprehensible scalding splash, the searing pain. Sarah listened, her face growing progressively grimmer with each word, her normally warm, compassionate eyes hardening into chips of glacial ice. Deirdre Ainsworth. Of course, the self-appointed queen of Harmony Creek, the petty tyrant who terrorized residents over misplaced garbage cans, unapproved paint colors, and children playing too loudly in their own yards. Sarah had heard the stories, the hushed complaints from other neighbors, too intimidated to confront Ainsworth directly. She knew Alistair Finch, the HOA president, relied on Ainsworth to be his enforcer for the community's myriad, often suffocating rules. But this was far beyond petty tyranny. This was a vicious criminal assault on a child. Her child. She just threw it. Zoey whispered, fresh tears welling in her swollen eyes, spilling over onto her burned skin, causing more stinging pain. She said I shouldn't be there. She was so angry, Mommy. Sarah's jaw clenched so tightly, her teeth ached. Inside her, a cold, controlled, razor-sharp rage began to build, the kind of focused fury she usually reserved for the predators she hunted in her professional life, the monsters who preyed on the innocent. This time, the predator had struck her own child in her own neighborhood, a place that was supposed to be safe. All right, sweetheart, she said, her voice deceptively calm, betraying none of the violent storm brewing within. We're going to get you taken care of first. That's the most important thing. Then, and only then, we're going to deal with Ms. Deirdre Ainsworth. She carefully, gently helped Zoey to her feet, her arm wrapped securely around her daughter's trembling shoulders, supporting her weight. One long, lingering look at the scattered, ruined cookies, the overturned wagon, the pathetic remnants of Zoey's innocent afternoon enterprise, and her resolve solidified into unshakable granite. This wasn't just about a burn, as horrific as that was. This was about an adult, a person in a position of perceived authority and power within the community, deliberately, maliciously harming a child who was deaf, who might not have fully understood the nuances of the verbal escalation, who was simply trying to participate in a cherished, innocent childhood activity. A child who, for all her bravery, was vulnerable. As Sarah led Zoey slowly, carefully away from Deirdre Ainsworth's perfect house with its cold, unblinking windows, she made a precise mental note of the sleek, new Aegis brand doorbell camera, positioned prominently above the door, its dark lens like a malevolent eye. This was part of HOA. President Finch's Harmony, Secure and Serene initiative, a system he boasted, gave the HOA board, particularly himself, oversight for community well-being. Oh yes, Ms. Ainsworth, Sarah thought with icy certainty. And perhaps Mr. Finch, too. We will be dealing with you, and you have absolutely no idea who you just messed with. The emergency room at County General Hospital was a cacophony of controlled chaos, beeping machines and hushed urgent voices. The attending physician, a Dr. Evans, was gentle but firm in his examination of Zoey. His diagnosis, first degree and superficial second degree, burns to the face, neck, and upper chest. Thankfully, Zoey's eyes, though severely irritated, red and swollen, had escaped serious permanent damage, largely due to her instinctive, split-second reaction to shut them tightly against the searing liquid. Dr. Evans explained the immediate treatment plan: cool compresses, copious amounts of antibiotic ointment, sterile dressings, and strong pain medication. He also stressed repeatedly the critical importance of keeping the burns meticulously clean to prevent infection, a serious risk with any significant burn. He asked with a professionally detached air how the injury had occurred. His brow furrowed slightly as Sarah, in clipped, precise, unemotional tones, explained the incident, omitting only her own profession. For the moment, she wanted to see his unvarnished reaction. As she spoke, Dr. Evans' expression shifted subtly from standard medical concern to a flicker of disbelief, then to a quiet, almost imperceptible anger, though his face remained largely impassive. An adult did this, with hot coffee, over Girl Scout cookies, he murmured, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. Sarah noted he seemed more focused on getting the official report details correct than on the barbarity of the act itself. Later, as Zoey was being treated by a nurse, Sarah saw Dr. Evans in the hallway speaking in low tones on his cell phone. She caught a snippet. "Yes, Mr. Finch's office. The report will be thorough. No unexpected complications." It struck her as odd, a faint discordant note in the symphony of the ER's usual activity. While Zoey was having her burns cleaned and dressed by a kind maternal nurse, Sarah stepped out into the bustling corridor and made a call. Not to her husband. Mark, not yet. He would be frantic, oscillating between terror and rage, and she needed to maintain a crystal-clear head to think strategically. She dialed her direct supervisor at the FBI special agent in charge, Michael Davies. "Davies." His voice answered, professional, brisk, instantly recognizable. "Mike, it's Sarah Jensen." "Sarah, everything all right? You're not on call this weekend, are you?" "It's personal, Mike, but it's also, well, it's a situation, my daughter Zoey. She was assaulted about maybe an hour and a half ago." A beat of silence. Then, assaulted, is she okay? What the hell happened? The concern in his voice was immediate, genuine. Davies was a good boss, a good man. Sarah quickly, succinctly outlined the horrifying events, her voice tight with carefully controlled emotion, a steely calm overlaying a boiling inferno of maternal rage. The Girl Scout, Cookies Deirdre Ainsworth, the meticulously manicured lawn, the deliberate targeted act of throwing scalding coffee directly into Zoey's face. She has first and second degree burns. Mike, on her face, her neck. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Davies breathed the shock evident in his voice. The woman just threw hot coffee on a 12-year-old girl. Deliberately, without provocation, Zoey is deaf. Mike, she wears cochlear implants. This Ainsworth woman was yelling at her about soliciting. It's entirely possible, probable even, that Zoey didn't fully comprehend the level of aggression, the imminent danger, until it was far too late. Sarah's voice trembled slightly on the last words. That just makes it exponentially worse. Malice aforethought. Where are you now? County General ER. Zoey's being treated by a Dr. Evans. He says her eyes should be okay, thankfully. Okay, Sarah, first things first. How is Zoey really beyond the physical? She's shaken deeply. In a lot of pain, obviously, but she's strong, Mike. She's incredibly resilient. They say her eyes will recover, but her face, it's bad enough. It's going to be a long road for those burns to heal. I'm so damn sorry, Sarah. Truly, for you, for Zoey, for Mark. Now, what do you need from me? From the Bureau. This was why Davies was a good boss. He understood the human element, the personal toll, but also the professional imperative, the mechanisms of justice. This woman, Deirdre Ainsworth, she lives at 12 Primrose Lane, Harmony Creek. She has one of those new AegisNet doorbell cameras, The HOA president, Alistair Finch, pushed that whole system on the community. I need that footage, Mike, untouched. And I want her charged assault with a dangerous weapon. Hot liquid intentionally used absolutely qualifies. And given Zoey's hearing impairment and Ainsworth's clear disproportionate aggression over a child simply trying to communicate, possibly signing, I want us to explore federal hate crime enhancers, willfully causing bodily injury to someone, a child, because of or on account of their disability. Davies was silent for a thoughtful moment. A federal hate crime designation for this specific scenario, it's a high bar, Sarah. You know that as well as I do. We'd need to prove specific, demonstrable intent related directly to the disability, not just general malice. I understand that, Mike, I live and breathe these statutes, but I also know that an adult intentionally throwing scalding coffee in the face of a 12-year-old child, regardless of any other factor, is aggravated assault, period. The hate crime aspect is something I want thoroughly, meticulously investigated. This woman knew Zoey was a child. She saw the sash. She knew she was selling Girl Scout cookies. Her reaction was grossly disproportionate, unhinged, and violent. And if Zoey's attempt to communicate, possibly through her signing or her slightly different speech pattern, due to the implants contributed to Ainsworth's rage, then yes, damn it, it's a hate crime in my book, and I want the full weight of the federal government to at least consider it. Okay, Sarah, okay. Local PD will obviously have primary jurisdiction on the assault itself. But if there's a clear, provable civil rights violation based on disability, we can certainly come in either in parallel or take lead if it escalates. First things first, that footage. You said an AegisNet camera, Finch's system. Interesting. Sarah provided the address again. She's an influential HOA board member, thinks she rules the neighborhood. Finch's right hand for the petty stuff, at least. So what? The type... Davies said, a distinct note of distaste in his voice. He'd dealt with small-town power trippers before. All right, I'll make some calls. I can coordinate with local PD to secure that footage. They'll likely need a warrant if she's not cooperative, and from your description, I highly suspect she won't be. You focus on Zoey. Take care of your daughter. Keep me updated on her condition and on what the local detective says. Thanks, Mike, I will. I appreciate this more than you know. And to Sarah. Davies added, his voice softening with genuine concern. Don't go all vigilante on me. I know you, and I know how this must be tearing you apart. Let the system work. We'll get her through the proper channels. Sarah managed a grim, humorless smile. The system is what I do, Mike. It's my life's work. I trust it, especially when I'm here to help it along every single step of the way. After the call, a measure of her professional composure restored, Sarah finally phoned Mark. As expected, he was initially horrified, then explosively enraged, then consumed with a desperate fatherly worry for Zoey. He rushed to the hospital, his face pale and drawn his eyes, darting anxiously around the ER waiting room, until he saw Sarah, who led him to Zoey's treatment cubicle. He hugged Zoey with infinite gentleness, whispering reassurances, his gaze locking with Sarah's over Zoey's bandaged head, a silent, profound communication of shared pain, fury, and grim, unyielding determination passing between them. The next few hours were a surreal, agonizing blur of medical care. Hushed consultations with nurses, attempts to soothe Zoey's pain and fear, and quiet, furious, meticulous planning on Sarah's part. She documented everything with the precision of a seasoned investigator, Zoey's visible injuries, Zoey's detailed account of the incident which she had. Zoey repeat carefully ensuring consistency, the ER doctor's official diagnosis, the recommended treatment. She took clear, well-lit photos of Zoey's burns with her phone, each click of the virtual shutter, a small hammer blow against Deirdre Ainsworth. Each image a piece of irrefutable evidence. By the time they were finally able to take Zoey home, her face and neck heavily bandaged, a prescription for strong pain medication clutched in Sarah's hand, it was early evening. The sun had set, casting long, somber shadows over Harmony Creek, its enforced serenity now feeling deeply personally violated. Mark settled Zoey gently on the plush living room couch with her favorite soft blanket, a cool drink, and her favorite animated movie. His calming presence, a steady, reassuring comfort. Sarah, however, was a coiled spring of barely suppressed energy. She'd received a text message from Davies. Local PD is en route to Miss Ainsworth's residence. Detective Miller is lead. They'll request the footage and an interview. If she refuses, they're prepared to secure the scene, and a judge is on standby for a telephonic warrant. We're monitoring. Finch has apparently been notified by someone about an incident and has pledged full HOA cooperation to the local PD chief. Take that as you will. Sarah couldn't sit still. The thought of Deirdre Ainsworth just a few streets away in her perfect colonial house, perhaps already consulting a lawyer, perhaps smugly believing she was untouchable, was intolerable. She walked to her home office, the quiet, organized room where she usually reviewed complex case files, studied intricate webs of evidence, and prepared for challenging court testimonies. Now her own precious daughter was the victim, the focal point of a new, intensely personal case file. The bitter irony was not lost on her. She pictured Deirdre Ainsworth probably congratulating herself on upholding the sanctity of Harmony Creek's no-soliciting rule, perhaps even complaining to Alistair Finch about the caliber of people trying to invade their community. The sheer arrogance, the unbridled entitlement, it was galling almost beyond comprehension. An hour later, as Sarah was meticulously typing up her own detailed notes of the day's events, another text from Davies pinged on her phone. Ainsworth was predictably uncooperative. Vehemently so refused to provide footage or make a statement without her lawyer present. Claimed the child was trespassing. Aggressive and provocative. Detective Miller said she was indignant, almost hysterical. They're getting the warrant now. Digital Forensics Unit is on standby. ETA for execution may be 2 hours. Uniformed officers will secure the residence in the meantime to prevent any accidental deletion of evidence. Sarah read the message, a grim, cold satisfaction settling deep in her bones. Uncooperative, indignant, claimed. Zoey was aggressive and provocative. Of course she did. That was the classic bully tactic. Blame the victim, deflect, deny. But Deirdre Ainsworth had made a critical, life-altering error. She had underestimated the quiet, determined little girl selling cookies, and she had absolutely no idea about the formidable, relentless forces she had just awakened. The AegisNet camera, Finch's prize system, would now be turned against one of his own. The doorbell camera footage, when it was finally obtained under warrant and meticulously reviewed later that night at the local police precinct, was utterly, unequivocally damning. It showed everything exactly as Zoey had described, but with a chilling clarity that even Zoey's tearful account couldn't fully convey Zoey's polite, almost hesitant approach. Deirdre Ainsworth's aggressive, immediate posture, her body language screaming hostility, Zoey attempting to speak, and then starting to sign her small hands, moving with innocent grace. And then the clear, unambiguous, horrifying act of Ainsworth, contemptuously, deliberately throwing the entire mug of coffee directly into Zoey's upturned face. There was no mistaking the intent. It was a targeted assault. The camera, with its surprisingly clear audio pickup, even captured Ainsworth's callous, victim-blaming words, "Well, look what you made me do," as Zoey lay crying and injured on the ground. Sarah watched the footage with Detective Miller from the local police department, a seasoned, seen-it-all officer with tired eyes and a cynical but ultimately fair outlook. When the sickening clip ended, Miller let out a slow, heavy breath. "Well, Agent Jensen," he said, shaking his head, "that's about as clear-cut as it gets for aggravated assault. The malicious intent is palpable. She doesn't even try to hide it. It's brazen." He paused. "The camera system, AegisNet, Mr. Finch, the HOA president, was very helpful in facilitating our access once the warrant was signed. said he wanted to show the system worked to protect the community even from internal issues. Seemed quite pleased to demonstrate its efficiency, actually. And the hate crime aspect. Sarah pressed her voice low, steady, unwavering. The fact Zoey was signing her deafness. Miller frowned, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. That's always trickier, Agent Jensen. As you well know from your federal work, we need to prove she targeted your daughter because of her disability, that it was a motivating factor, not just a coincidental characteristic of the victim. Her general, shall we say, nastiness and vile temper aren't enough for that enhancement under state law. But the fact that Zoey was clearly trying to communicate, potentially using sign language, which Ainsworth dismissed as pantomime, and this was her immediate violent response. It's definitely something the DA will need to consider very carefully. We'll include all of Zoey's statements and your observations about the communication attempts in the report. The federal angle, your office will know best how to pursue that, but from our perspective, the felony assault charge is rock solid. Assault in the second degree, likely given the use of a dangerous instrument, the hot coffee, and the extent of the injuries. Maybe even first degree depending on how the DA wants to play it. I want her to understand the full gravity of what she did, Sarah said, her voice resonating with cold fury. Not just to Zoey, but to any child, any person with a disability, any individual who might be seen by people like her as an easy target, as less than... Over the next 24 to 48 hours, things moved with a speed that was unusual for the typically overburdened local justice system, but not entirely unheard of when an FBI agent's child was the victim of such a clear and vicious violent crime. And the evidence was so irrefutable and readily available. The local district attorney's office, working in close conjunction with information supplied by Sarah through official FBI channels regarding the potential for parallel federal charges, an investigation moved with impressive alacrity. An arrest warrant was drafted, reviewed, and issued for Deirdre Ainsworth for felony assault. The DA, a pragmatic but ambitious woman named Caroline Phelps, was already considering the potential for additional enhancers based on the victim's age and vulnerability. The arrest itself, when it occurred the following afternoon, was almost anticlimactic in its swiftness and efficiency. 2 uniformed officers, a male and a female, arrived at Deirdre Ainsworth's perfect colonial house. This time, there was no hiding behind the door, no chance to refuse entry. They had a warrant, a legal document compelling her submission. Sarah wasn't there to witness it. She was at home with Zoey, tenderly helping her change the dressings on her burns, a painful, tearful process for both of them. But she heard about it later in detail from Detective Miller Missies. Ainsworth had apparently been utterly indignant, protesting loudly and shrilly about her rights, her impeccable standing in the community, her influential position on the HOA board, mentioning Alistair Finch's name several times as if he were a personal protector, and the utter absurdity and maliciousness of the charges. She'd even threatened to sue the police department, the city, and everyone involved for harassment and defamation. Her protests, however vociferous and entitled as they were, fell on deaf, professionally impassive ears. She was handcuffed, the metallic click of the restraints. A sharp, definitive sound read her Miranda rights and placed in the back of a squad car. She was driven away from her pristine sanctuary, leaving the meticulously pruned roses in her perfect garden to bear silent witness to her ignominious and very public departure. The news of Deirdre Ainsworth's arrest spread through the hermetically sealed environment of Harmony Creek. Like wildfire fanned by a gale, Deirdre Ainsworth arrested for assaulting a child with coffee. The neighborhood, usually a quiet tapestry of polite nods and murmured greetings, buzzed with shocked whispers, urgent texts, and hushed phone calls. Many residents, emboldened by her downfall, began recalling their own unpleasant bullying encounters with the HOA's chief enforcer. Some expressed genuine surprise. They knew she was difficult, but not capable of this. Others, a significant number, voiced a grim, quiet sort of satisfaction. The prominent no soliciting, strictly enforced by Harmony Creek, HOA signs at the entrance to the subdivision suddenly seemed less like benign rules and more like monuments to arrogance and misplaced authority. Alastair Finch, the HOA president, quickly issued a carefully worded public statement expressing profound shock and dismay at the allegations against Miss Ainsworth, emphasizing that her alleged actions do not reflect the values of Harmony Creek, and promising full cooperation with law enforcement. He also subtly highlighted the efficiency of the HOA's AegisNet security system in bringing clarity to this unfortunate incident. For Sarah, the arrest was just the first necessary step. The long, arduous legal battle was next, and she was prepared professionally and personally to see it through, no matter how long it took, no matter what resources it required. She explained to Zoey in simple, age-appropriate terms what was happening. "The lady who hurt you, Zoey, the one who lives in the blue house, she's been arrested by the police. That means the police and the prosecutor believe she did something very wrong, something against the law, and now a judge will decide what happens to her because of it." Zoey listened intently, her small face still tender, patched with white gauze and glistening ointment, her eyes, though less swollen, still wide, and shadowed with a lingering fear and confusion. "Will she say sorry, Mommy?" She asked, her voice small, barely above a whisper. "Will she understand she hurt me badly?" Sarah hugged her gently, carefully, her heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. "I don't know, sweetheart, I truly don't. Some people, especially when they've done something very wrong, don't know how to say sorry, or they don't mean it if they do. But what matters most, Zoey, is that she understands that what she did was terribly wrong, and that the law will make sure she can't hurt you or anyone else like that ever again." The initial arraignment for Deirdre Ainsworth was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning in the county courthouse. Sarah planned to be there, not in her official capacity as an FBI agent, though her presence would undoubtedly be noted, but as Zoey's mother, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. Word of the incident, however, fueled by neighborhood gossip and the official police report, had begun to leak beyond the carefully guarded confines of Harmony Creek. A local news station, always hungry for stories of suburban drama and malfeasance, picked up the story. Prominent HOA board member arrested for allegedly scalding Girl Scout with coffee. The inflammatory headline was an instant attention grabber. The accompanying article also mentioned the detail about Zoey being hearing impaired and using cochlear implants, adding another layer of public sympathy and outrage. That's when the calls started coming in first, to the local police, then through community grapevines to Sarah and Mark. The first significant one was from the local chapter of a national deaf-advocacy group. They offered support, legal resources, counseling referrals for Zoey, and expressed their profound outrage at what they termed a clear act of discriminatory violence. Then other groups followed: child welfare organizations, disability rights activists, even former Girl Scouts from across the country. The story, with its starkly clear villain and innocent sympathetic victim, resonated deeply and widely. The fact that Zoey was a Girl Scout, engaged in a beloved, iconic American tradition of youthful enterprise and community engagement, only amplified the public sympathy and the corresponding condemnation of Ainsworth. The Girl Scouts organization itself issued a carefully worded but firm national statement condemning the violence in the strongest possible terms and offering their full support to Zoey and her family. Overnight, something unexpected and quite incredible happened. Zoey's personal Girl Scout cookie sales webpage, which her troop leader, a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson, had shared online in a local parenting forum as a simple gesture of support and solidarity, went viral. Fueled by shares from the advocacy groups and mentions in burgeoning online news articles, people from all over the country, then from around the world, moved by Zoey's story and utterly horrified by Deirdre Ainsworth's cruelty, began placing orders, thousands upon thousands of them. By Monday morning, Zoey had over 5,000 pre-orders for cookies, then 10,000, then 20. Boxes of Thin Mints, Samoas, Tagalongs and trefoils became tangible symbols of solidarity, a sugary wave of support for a brave little girl and a resounding rebuke to her attacker, Mark. Usually the more stoic of the two was visibly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the outpouring. "Sarah, you have to look at this," he said, his voice filled with awe, showing her the constantly updating order numbers on his tablet. It's insane. People are leaving thousands of messages of support for Zoey, calling Ainsworth a monster, a disgrace, sharing their own stories of bullying. Some are even offering to pay for her medical bills for therapy. Sarah looked at the messages, scrolling through pages of heartfelt encouragement and righteous anger, a lump forming in her throat, tears blurring her vision. People are good, Mark. She whispered her own faith in humanity, so often battered by her job, getting a much-needed restorative boost. Most people really are. The intense media attention was both a blessing and a curse. It brought an incredible, heartwarming wave of support for Zoey, bolstering her spirits and providing a powerful counter-narrative to her traumatic experience. But it also meant increased scrutiny, a relentless public gaze on their family, on Deirdre Ainsworth, and on the community of Harmony Creek. Deirdre Ainsworth, now widely and derisively nicknamed Coffee Karen, Hotshot HOA, or the Harmony Creek Scalder in online forums and social media comment sections, was rapidly becoming a national symbol of petty tyranny, escalated to shocking violence, the embodiment of entitled rage. Her perfect colonial house, once a symbol of her status, was now featured repeatedly on news segments and in online articles, its pristine lawn and meticulously maintained garden, a stark, ironic contrast to the ugly, violent accusations leveled against its owner. Paparazzi occasionally lurked near their own home, hoping for a shot of Zoey. On the day of the arraignment, the normally quiet county courthouse was buzzing with an unusual level of activity. News vans from several local and even a few national affiliate stations were parked outside their satellite dishes, pointing skyward. Representatives from various deaf advocacy groups and child protection organizations held discreet, respectful signs calling for justice for Zoey and end violence against children. Sarah, Mark, and Zoey entered through a secure side door, shielded from the media scrum by court officers arranged by Detective Miller. Zoey was understandably nervous, her small hand clinging tightly to Sarah's. Sarah herself felt a complicated mixture of anxiety, steely resolve, and a grim sense of duty. She was stepping into a different kind of arena today, not one of covert investigations and evidence analysis rooms, but one of public justice under the full glare of the media spotlight. Deirdre Ainsworth was brought into the crowded courtroom in handcuffs. Her expensive linen suit from the day of the assault now rumpled and stained her once perfect helmet of blonde hair, slightly askew and dull. She looked pale, drawn, and visibly stressed, dark circles under her eyes. But as her eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the packed gallery, the news sketch artists, and the stern face of the judge, a flicker of her old arrogance. Her ingrained sense of superiority seemed to return. Her gaze found Sarah and Zoey sitting in the front row with Mark and a victim advocate. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, her lips curled into what looked unmistakably like a faint sneer before her newly acquired high-priced defense attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Arthur Pendleton, quickly whispered something sharp and urgent in her ear. Ainsworth's expression shuddered, becoming more guarded, but no less defiant. The charges were read aloud by the court clerk in a monotone voice. Assault in the second degree, a serious felony. The prosecutor, a sharp, ambitious young assistant district attorney named Alicia Ramirez, also noted for the record that the state was actively considering additional charges and enhancements related to the victim's age, her documented disability, and the potential for demonstrating specific prejudice, pending further investigation, which would involve ongoing consultation with federal authorities, including the FBI. This last part caused a visible stir in the courtroom, and a scowl from Pendleton, Deirdre Ainsworth, through Mr. Pendleton, who spoke in smooth, confident tones, pleaded not guilty in a surprisingly firm voice. Bail was the next item. Adia Ramirez argued forcefully for a high bail amount, citing the violent, unprovoked nature of the attack on a minor, the strong, irrefutable video evidence, and Ainsworth's apparent lack of remorse and potential ongoing risk to community safety, particularly to the victim. Pendleton countered, arguing for a low bail or even release on her own recognizance, emphasizing Ainsworth's previously clean record, her strong community ties, ironically, her HOA board membership, and painting her as a pillar of the community who was being unfairly pilloried by a media frenzy. The judge, a no-nonsense, experienced jurist named Marion Graves, listened patiently to both sides. After a moment of deliberation, she set bail at a surprisingly substantial amount, $250,000. Judge Graves cited the violent nature of the documented attack on a vulnerable minor, the compelling nature of the initial evidence presented in the police report, including a detailed description of the video footage and Ms. Ainsworth's apparent behavioral volatility, as reasons for deeming her a potential ongoing risk to the community if not sufficiently constrained by significant financial surety. Ainsworth gasped audibly when the bail amount was announced, her face paling further. Her lawyer immediately began arguing for a reduction, looking flustered for the first time. Sarah watched her expression carefully, neutral, unreadable. The wheels of justice, often slow and cumbersome, were indeed turning slowly, but surely. Adia Ramirez, who had met briefly with Sarah and Mark before the hearing, had impressed Sarah with her quiet intensity and thorough preparation. An attack on a child, any child, is an attack on the entire community. Ramirez had said, her dark eyes flashing with conviction. And the circumstances here, Ms. Jensen, are particularly egregious. We will pursue this with the full extent of our resources. As they left the courtroom, carefully shielded once again by court officers, the swell of quiet support from onlookers was palpable. People they didn't even know, other parents. Members of the advocacy groups offered quiet words of encouragement to Zoey, praising her bravery. One woman, who introduced herself tearfully as a mother of a deaf child, pressed a small, beautifully handmade bluebird pin into Zoey's hand. "For courage, little one," she whispered, her own eyes filled with tears of empathy. "You are so brave." Zoey clutched the pin tightly, a small, tentative smile gracing her lips. The story of Zoey, the brave Girl Scout, and Coffee Karen Ainsworth exploded nationally, then internationally. The doorbell video, eventually released through an unauthorized leak to a major news network. Detective Miller suspected a disgruntled former HOA employee, or even someone within Finch's circle, wanting to ensure Ainsworth took the full fall, played on a seemingly endless loop on cable news channels and across countless social media feeds, horrifying viewers with its raw, unedited brutality. Deirdre Ainsworth became an instant, universally recognized pariah. The Harmony Creek HOA, facing a torrent of negative publicity and intense pressure from residents, convened an emergency board meeting. Alistair Finch, looking suitably grave and concerned, on a hastily arranged local news interview, announced that Miss Ainsworth had been unanimously voted off the board effective immediately, and that the HOA unequivocally condemned Miss Ainsworth's isolated and shocking actions. Yarsh. He also announced the HOA was issuing a formal public apology to Zoey and her family, and offered with a grand flourish to pay for all of Zoey's medical bills and replace all the ruined cookies Sarah and Mark, through their lawyer, politely declined the HOA's financial offer for medical bills, as their insurance would cover those expenses. They did, however, suggest that a substantial donation to the local deaf services charity in Zoey's name would be a far more appropriate and meaningful gesture for the HOA to make Finch publicly agreed, eager to salvage Harmony Creek's reputation. The federal investigation into the potential hate crime aspect, spearheaded by Sarah's own FBI colleagues under SAC Davies's careful oversight, moved forward with quiet efficiency. FBI agents, discreet and professional, interviewed other residents of Harmony Creek, meticulously gathering accounts of Deirdre Ainsworth's past behavior, her interactions, her pronouncements, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, one that painted a portrait of someone deeply intolerant, someone who was virulently prejudiced against anyone or anything that didn't fit her narrow, rigid definition of acceptable or normal. Sue. There were credible stories of her berating a new immigrant family for speaking Spanish in their own front yard, claiming it was disruptive to the neighborhood's character. There were accounts of her repeatedly calling HOA security on teenagers of color who were visiting friends within the community, baselessly accusing them of suspicious activity. Most damningly, another family who had since moved away provided a sworn affidavit about Ainsworth making overtly derogatory comments about their son who used a wheelchair and her aggressive attempts to block the installation of a necessary accessibility ramp at their home, calling it unsightly and not in keeping with Harmony Creek's aesthetic standards. This pattern of behavior was crucial for the federal case. While Deirdre Ainsworth's lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, fought aggressively to have the charges reduced and key evidence, particularly the video, suppressed, claiming his client was the true victim of a relentless media witch hunt, and that the coffee incident was an unfortunate, regrettable accident caused by her being startled and provoked by a trespassing and surprisingly belligerent child. The prosecution, bolstered by the thoroughness of the local police work and the emerging findings from the FBI's parallel investigation, held firm. ADA Ramirez, with the full backing of DA Phelps, successfully petitioned the court to add an enhancement to the felony assault charge commission of a crime showing prejudice based on the victim's perceived disability. This significantly raised the stakes for Ainsworth, potentially adding years to any sentence if convicted. The legal process was slow, a grinding, meticulous machine. There were depositions, pretrial hearings, motions filed and argued. Deirdre Ainsworth, eventually out on the substantial bail her family had struggled to raise by mortgaging property, was largely confined to her now infamous colonial house, an electronic ankle monitor, a constant, humiliating reminder of her situation. She saw her carefully constructed world, her social standing, her entire identity crumble around her. Her few remaining friends distanced themselves. Her social invitations dried up. Her phone calls went unreturned. The coveted "for sale" sign that eventually appeared stark and prominent in front of her perfect colonial house was seen by many in Harmony Creek and beyond as a clear, tangible sign of her inevitable defeat and ruin. She was forced to sell the house, her sanctuary and symbol of status, to cover her mounting, exorbitant legal fees. Throughout it all, Zoey showed remarkable quiet resilience. Her physical burns healed slowly, eventually leaving faint silvery scars on her cheek and neck that she, with a child's profound wisdom, started calling her warrior marks. The incredible, astonishing outpouring of global support, the tens of thousands of cookie orders, which her troop, with the dedicated help of numerous other local troops and even adult volunteers, worked tirelessly for weeks to fulfill, package, and ship, and the deeply reassuring knowledge that so many people truly cared, helped her to process the trauma in a way that therapy alone might not have achieved. She diligently attended her art therapy sessions, and her drawings, once primarily filled with whimsical happy creatures, now sometimes featured brave shining knights battling scowling coffee-wielding dragons, with the knights always emerging victorious. She bought her new art tablet with the first wave of cookie money, a bittersweet acquisition. Sarah, meanwhile, expertly, almost superhumanly balanced her demanding roles as a fiercely protective mother, a supportive wife, and a silent, powerful force behind the scenes of the legal proceedings. She provided meticulously documented information and insights to Ada Ramirez and the FBI team. She attended every single court hearing with Zoey and Mark. By her side, her calm, unwavering presence in the courtroom, a steady, unspoken reminder to everyone involved that they would not back down. They would not be intimidated. They would see this through to the very end. She drew immense strength from Zoey's quiet courage and from the countless messages of support and solidarity that continued to pour in from strangers around the world. Her FBI colleagues, particularly SAC Davies, were a constant source of professional solidarity and quiet, effective support, ensuring that the investigation into the federal hate crime element was exceptionally thorough, by the book, and meticulous. The trial, when it finally arrived, nearly a year after the incident, was a media sensation. The small county courthouse was besieged by reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. Deirdre Ainsworth's defense attorney Arthur Pendleton, clearly earning his high fees, tried to paint Zoey as a surprisingly persistent and provocative sales child, and his client Deirdre as a highly stressed, chronically anxious, misunderstood woman who was burdened by the immense pressures of maintaining community standards in an increasingly unruly world, and who had simply tragically snapped under unbearable pressure. He argued with considerable rhetorical flourish, but little factual basis, that the coffee splash was essentially accidental, a clumsy, unfortunate spill during a heated, stressful moment of mutual misunderstanding. But the video footage, played multiple times for the jury on a large screen, was irrefutable, visceral, and deeply disturbing. Zoey, now 13 small for her age, but composed and articulate, testified with the skilled assistance of a certified American Sign Language interpreter. She recounted the events of that horrible afternoon, clearly, concisely, and without embellishment. Her small hands, signing gracefully, her soft voice, aided by her implants, filling the hushed courtroom with its quiet dignity. When she described with a child's heartbreaking simplicity the searing, shocking pain of the hot coffee on her face, several jurors visibly flinched, one older woman dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Sarah also testified. Not about her FBI role, that was carefully kept separate to avoid any appearance of undue influence on the state case, but about finding Zoey, about the nature and severity of her injuries, about the medical treatment, and about Zoey's character, her gentleness, her inherent kindness, her love for art, and her Girl Scout activities. She spoke simply, powerfully, as a mother, her voice thick with a pain and a fierce, protective love that was palpable, resonating deeply with everyone in the courtroom, especially the parents on the jury. However, the most compelling and strategically crucial evidence beyond Zoey's powerful testimony and the damning video came from the meticulous findings of the FBI's hate crime investigation presented by SAC Michael Davies himself, who had been subpoenaed by the prosecution. Agent Davies, calm, professional, and authoritative on the stand, presented carefully vetted evidence that showed Deirdre Ainsworth had a demonstrable, documented history of prejudice and discriminatory actions against various minority groups, including specific, undeniable instances of animus towards individuals with disabilities. He detailed with supporting documentation and corroborated witness statements the incident where Ainsworth had aggressively tried to get the Harmony Creek HOA under President Alistair Finch's leadership at the time to find a family because their young deaf child, who primarily used sign language, was making strange, disturbing gestures in their own yard gestures, which Ainsworth had outrageously claimed were disturbing the peace and lowering property values. This clear, documented evidence of prior animus, of a pattern of behavior, was crucial for supporting the hate crime enhancement. Pendleton's attempts to discredit Davies or dismiss the evidence as irrelevant character assassination fell flat against Davies's calm, factual presentation. The jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, deliberated for less than 6 hours, a remarkably short time for such a high-profile case. The court clerk's call echoed through the tense, packed courtroom. "We have a verdict." The verdict came back. Guilty of felony assault in the 2nd degree, and significantly guilty on the hate crime enhancement, finding that Deirdre Ainsworth had indeed selected her victim Zoey, at least in part due to prejudice against her disability. Deirdre Ainsworth, standing beside her lawyer, showed no discernible emotion as the foreperson read the verdict, her face a stony, impassive mask. But as Judge Graves, her expression stern, ordered Ainsworth taken into custody, immediately pending sentencing, revoking her bail due to the felony conviction. A single solitary tear finally traced a slow, glistening path down Deirdre Ainsworth's pale cheek. The fight was over. She had lost utterly. Sarah reached for Zoey's hand, squeezing it tightly, a wave of profound relief washing over her so immense it almost buckled her knees. Mark put his arms around them, both pulling them close, his own eyes wet with emotion. Justice. It had been a long, incredibly arduous, emotionally draining road, but they had finally reached their destination. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed again, if possible, even more so than during the trial. A.D. Alicia Ramirez, her voice ringing with righteous conviction, argued passionately for a significant prison sentence. She emphasized the profound vulnerability of the young victim, the unprovoked, malicious nature of the attack, the lasting physical and emotional scars inflicted upon Zoey, and the clear, irrefutable evidence of prejudice that the jury had affirmed. This was not just an assault, Your Honor. Ramirez stated, her gaze fixed on Judge Graves. This was a cowardly act of violence fueled by hate, a message of intolerance delivered with scalding liquid to the innocent face of a child. This community, and indeed any civilized society, demands meaningful accountability. It demands a sentence that reflects the profound gravity of this crime. Deirdre Ainsworth's lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, now looking considerably less confident, pleaded for leniency for probation, for extensive community service, perhaps mandatory counseling. He painted a picture of a woman whose life was utterly ruined, who had lost her home, her reputation, her standing in the community. He argued that she had suffered enough and had truly learned her lesson. Ainsworth herself, looking frail and diminished in her ill-fitting county jail jumpsuit, was given a chance to speak. She stood trembling visibly and offered a halting, tearful, barely audible apology directly to Zoey. "I am so very sorry." She choked out tears streaming down her face now. "I never meant to hurt you so badly. I was so stressed, so angry. I am not a monster. Please believe me." Zoey, sitting between her parents, listened quietly, her expression unreadable. She looked at Miss Ainsworth, not with hatred, not with anger, but with a kind of sad, distant understanding. Later, she would tell Sarah with a wisdom far beyond her years, "I think she's just a very unhappy, very broken person inside, Mom. It doesn't make what she did right, but it makes me feel a little bit sorry for her." Judge Graves, however, appeared unmoved by the belated, tearful apology or the lawyer's pleas. She spoke at length about the profound and lasting impact of Ainsworth's actions, not only on Zoey personally, but on the wider community, and the critical importance of sending an unequivocal message that such hateful, violent behavior could not and would not be tolerated. She then sentenced Deirdre Ainsworth to 5 years in state prison. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. 5 years. For a first-time offender, even with the enhancement, it was a stern sentence. The judge also ordered Ainsworth to pay full restitution for Zoey's past and future medical expenses. Though insurance had covered most of it, the restitution by law would go into a trust for Zoey's future needs, including any long-term therapy or scar revision treatments, and to undergo mandatory intensive anger management and sensitivity training upon her eventual release. But Judge Graves wasn't finished. She added a pointed addendum looking directly at the prosecution table where FBI agents, including SAC Davies, were observing. Furthermore, the judge stated, her voice firm, "Given the federal interest in this case, the compelling evidence of a pattern of discriminatory behavior presented during trial and certain, shall we say, ancillary financial irregularities that have been alluded to concerning the operations of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association under its current leadership. This court notes that federal prosecutors are, I trust, still actively evaluating their options. These could, and perhaps should, include separate federal charges or further civil actions aimed at asset forfeiture related to any profiting from a position that was used to facilitate or perpetuate discrimination or financial malfeasance. Alistair Finch, the HOA president who was seated in the gallery among other Harmony Creek dignitaries, ostensibly to show community support for justice, suddenly looked extremely uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, his usually smooth, confident demeanor visibly faltering. The implicit threat of further investigation, potential financial ruin, and public disgrace hung heavy and undeniable in the courtroom air. Deirdre Ainsworth's personal assets, already severely diminished by her massive legal fees, and the distressed sale of her house, would likely be further targeted by civil suits from Zoey's family. But the judge's words clearly indicated a much wider net might be cast. And then, just as the bailiffs were about to lead Deirdre Ainsworth away, her lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, who had been conferring urgently with a pale and shaken Ainsworth, stood up. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, imbued with a new, unexpected urgency. "My client has instructed me to present new information evidence that only just became fully available to us, which is critically relevant to the sentencing, specifically regarding mitigating factors of duress and manipulation by a third party. It may also be pertinent to the ancillary matters you just alluded to." "Your Honor." A hush fell over the courtroom ADA. Ramirez looked instantly wary, exchanging a quick glance with SAC Davies. "Proceed, Mr. Pendleton." Judge Graves said, her eyes narrowed. "But be very concise. This is highly irregular at this stage." "Ms. Ainsworth, Your Honor." Pendleton announced, his voice resonating with newfound gravitas. While fully accepting the jury's verdict on her actions, that day was herself a victim of sustained psychological pressure and covert manipulation by Mr. Alistair Finch, the president of the Harmony Creek HOA. He held up a small, sleek USB drive. This device contains audio recordings secretly made by Ms. Ainsworth during several private meetings with Mr. Finch over the past 18 months. In these recordings, Mr. Finch is heard explicitly pressuring Ms. Ainsworth to silence her internal inquiries into highly suspicious multi-million-dollar no-bid contracts awarded by him for the Harmony Secure and Serene Initiative, contracts awarded to companies with direct personal links to Mr. Finch himself. He is heard threatening her career, her reputation, and subtly referencing her well-known temper, suggesting that if she didn't toe the line on his financial agenda, such a temper might lead to an unfortunate incident that could be conveniently captured by his new AegisNet surveillance system, an incident that would effectively neutralize her as a threat to his operations. He essentially groomed her for a fall, Your Honor, intending to use her as both a scapegoat for resident discontent over rising fees and as a tool to be discarded when she became too inquisitive. The courtroom erupted into stunned murmurs. Alistair Finch leaped to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage, lies, slander," he sputtered before being gavelled into silence by Judge Graves. Sarah's mind raced. The pieces clicked into place. Dr. Evans's odd phone call, Finch's overly eager cooperation with the AegisNet footage, Deirdre's initial almost incoherent ramblings to Detective Miller about being set up and under pressure, which had been dismissed as desperate deflections. Deirdre was still a monster for what she did to Zoey, but she might also have been a pawn in a much larger, far more insidious game of corruption and power. Judge Graves, her expression thunderous, immediately called for a recess. "Mr. Pendleton, you will provide that USB drive to the district attorney and to special agent in charge. Davies, forthwith. ADA Ramirez. I expect a preliminary assessment of this new evidence. Within the hour, Mr. Finch, you will remain in this courthouse. You are not to leave the premises." The immediate consequence was pandemonium. News reporters scrambled, their phones flying, ADA Ramirez and SAC. Davies huddled together, their faces grim but energized. Sarah watched Alistair Finch, now surrounded by court officers, his mask of respectability shattered, revealing the panicked, cornered rat beneath. As Deirdre Ainsworth was finally led away in handcuffs to begin her 5-year prison sentence, her revelation not absolving her of her crime against Zoey, but potentially mitigating her ultimate culpability in the eyes of a parole board years down the line, and certainly igniting a new explosive investigation. A different kind of quiet settled over Sarah, Mark, and Zoey. The fight for Zoey's justice was won, but a new front had just opened. The media predictably went into a frenzy over the Harmony Creek HOA corruption scandal. Alistair Finch was arrested later that day based on the contents of Deirdre's recordings and other swiftly gathered corroborating evidence of financial crimes by the FBI. His empire of petty tyranny and grand larceny began to unravel with astonishing speed. The Harmony, Secure and Serene initiative was exposed as a massive embezzlement scheme. Other HOA board members, Finch's cronies, were implicated. Harmony Creek slowly returned to its version of normal, though it was a more chastened, more aware, and ultimately more compassionate community. The no soliciting sign at the entrance was quietly taken down by the new interim HOA board, and eventually replaced with one that read, "Welcome to Harmony Creek, a community that cares, listens, and values all its residents." Zoey, with her warrior marks and her new art tablet, filled with vibrant drawings of a world where kindness and courage always triumphed over cruelty and corruption, continued to sell Girl Scout cookies each year. The thousands of cookie orders had translated into a substantial fund for her future education and artistic pursuits. But far more importantly, they had shown her and the world the immense restorative power of collective goodwill and the unyielding strength found in vulnerability. Sarah Jensen went back to her demanding job at the FBI, fighting for other children who had been victimized by darkness in its many forms. But now she carried with her a deeper, more personal understanding of what victims and their families endured, a renewed and even fiercer commitment to her vital work, and the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, even in the face of ugly prejudice, senseless violence, and deeply entrenched corruption, justice in all its complex forms could indeed prevail. And sometimes the most formidable weapon wasn't a gun or a badge, but the unwavering love of a mother, the incredible resilience of a child, and the courage of even a flawed individual to finally expose a greater evil. The system, with dedicated people pushing it, had worked. A dangerous woman was off the streets, her power to harm diminished, and a corrupt power broker who had hidden his crimes behind a veneer of respectability and manipulated others to his own ends was finally facing his own reckoning. His ill-gotten gains and symbols of authority being dismantled by the very due process he had sought to exploit and deny to others. The fight had been hard, the emotional toll immense, but the ripples of justice were spreading wider than anyone could have initially imagined.